Welcome back to the OIS Podcast. Register today for our Dry Eye Innovation Showcase on March 11th that will feature 8 company presentations and 2 panels to provide industry and clinical perspectives. Visit ois.net/events to reserve your spot. We have the Venerable Vince Anido on the line for this episode. Vince is the CEO of Aerie Pharmaceuticals, one of the most accomplished emerging growth companies in ophthalmology. He tells about his early days in Cuba and how his environment shaped his professional path. Vince divulges the strategies Aerie has used to grow their business and improve the way they develop the products that have ultimately helped to change the way we manage glaucoma patients. Let's listen in and learn how Vince positioned Aerie as a global force to be reckoned with. Lots to learn. Let's get started.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the OIS Podcast. My name is Rob Rothman. I have had the privilege of being a moderator for several OIS panels in the past. By way of introduction, I am a board-certified ophthalmologist, fellowship trained in glaucoma and in clinical practice for a significant portion of my time. The remainder of my work days are spent as the co-founder and managing member of InFocus Capital Partners, which is an ophthalmically focused venture capital fund here in the US. We have a portfolio that consists of 12 ophthalmic opportunities, all early stage. And by way of disclosure, we do not trade in the public space, and therefore I have no interest financially with today's guest. So that's my disclosure. I am fortunate enough to have today for my first OIS podcast guest, Vince Anido, who is the chairman and CEO of Aerie Pharmaceuticals, somebody who I've always wanted to sit down with one-on-one. We've had the opportunity to meet several times in the past. And we'll discuss some of those reasons why I've always wanted to speak with Vince. And Vince, now you will be forever known as my first. So not to put too much pressure on you, but really appreciate you taking the time and coming on the podcast today.
Well, thank you, Rob. And I promise not to screw it up, at least not on purpose.
Well, I do not make that promise, but too bad. It's just the way it goes. I thought that in the spirit of homeschooling and the current academic environment, we would start today's discussion off with a little quiz. So it's a pop quiz for Vince. Didn't know he was getting this, which I think is always exciting. And it should be pretty easy. So it's one question. I did a little homework before our discussion today, and I communicated with a few of my ophthalmology friends, and I put down on an email 10 ophthalmology companies. And I said, send this back to me without looking it up and tell me who the chairman is or CEO is of each of these companies, all glaucoma focused into the glaucoma space. And who do you think was the one name that everybody knew on that list? Don't think too hard, Vince. It was you. It was you. It was you. So, it's a very interesting thing. And I did that because I started to think to myself, I don't necessarily know who the CEOs are of a lot of the companies whose products I deal with on a daily basis, but why is it that I know Vince? What is it that makes it so that I have come to know your name so clearly when I haven't had the ability to know that from many other companies? And I think it'll be sort of a focus of the conversation today, and hopefully we'll get to it. But I'd like to start off, if we can, today with discussing a little bit about you. So I have no interest in becoming the CEO of a large pharma corporation. So that's good, I guess. But I think there are a lot of people who would like to understand how that happens. What is it? How has your educational background sort of helped shape you? How has that led you to the position that you're in now? And what experiences have you had in your professional life that have sort of built up to you becoming, the CEO of one of the most important companies in ophthalmology today? So I don't know, maybe go back to the beginning, how you grew up, where your education led you, all that stuff. Give us a little insight into the progress of Vince Anido through the ranks.
Sure. So I've been in the pharmaceutical industry pretty much all of my adult life. And the reason that that was important to me is I came from a healthcare family. My dad was a doctor, he was a clinical pathologist. My mom was an operating room head nurse, and I was born in Cuba. So shortly after Castro took over, they decided that it was time to move the family out of there. So I was about 8 years old, and they took us out of there and moved us to Miami. And so I actually grew up in what is now South Beach, went to Miami Beach Elementary, and then went on from there. And then eventually my dad got his medical license back. And that was probably one of the early learnings, in that education for him was it. He said, no matter what, no matter who takes over a country, no matter what they try to do to you, the one thing that you have that can always make you come back is your education. So education for us was always very, very important. So he got his license back, and he became chair of clinical pathology at West Virginia University. We moved there in the early 60s, and it was the first time I ever saw snow. And to this day, I still hate it. So that's why I've always tried to live in southern climates. And so, but I went to school there because I decided a long time ago that I was going to pay my way through school. Didn't want anybody worrying about me. Didn't want anybody telling me what to do, what to study, what kind of grades we get, which is probably a good thing because I wasn't the world's best college student. So I got my BS and my master's degree from WVU. My BS was in pharmacy, and my master's degree was in pharmaceutical sciences. But again, following what I learned from my dad, I went on and decided that after school, I had an interest, not so much in the science side, although I was okay at that, but it was mainly on the business side of pharmacy and everything related to pharmacy and healthcare. So I went to University of Missouri in Kansas City and did two things. One, pursued the PhD there in pharmaceutical sciences, so I completed that. But at the same time, I worked for my first pharmaceutical company, which at the time was Marion Laboratories. Marion was in the gastroenterology, cardiology fields. It was doing branded generics way back, all the way from the beginnings in the 50s on through. And then we came out with two licensed products. One was called Cardizem and the other one Carafate. They transformed the company. So over a 5-year period, our stock doubled and split 5 years in a row. And they picked a number of us to develop in very, very quickly because the company was growing so fast. So I was one of just 2 or 3 folks that they selected for general management. And so I literally had a different job every 2 years for about a 6-year period. And then they actually sent me up to Canada to go run a 50% owned business, which was a freestanding pharmaceutical company called Nordic Laboratories. So I lived in Montreal for not quite 4 years, had to learn the language because most of the folks there spoke French, and we ran our meetings in both English and French. I had an outside board. So that was my first CEO gig. So I was in my mid 30s and went through that. And then they brought me back to the US, and it was about the time that I met Gavin Herbert. And so Gavin is the one that convinced me to move to Allergan. And that was my first introduction into ophthalmology. And the thing that I learned from Gavin, and while it's always an honor to be recognized in a survey like the one that you ran, I have to admit I wasn't 100% surprised, because the one thing Gavin taught me and everybody else who was there was the importance of the customer. No matter where we went, whether it was in ophthalmology meetings or dermatology meetings, et cetera, everybody knew Gavin. And so for me, the focus has always been about the customer. And so ever since I moved into ophthalmology, I got to do things we couldn't do in cardiology, because and gastroenterology, you just couldn't get to meet all the doctors. It just wouldn't have the relationship that we have in ophthalmology. So it's a very unique grouping of people, that both in terms of those that are direct patient contacts and those of us who provide goods and services. And so not only at Allergan, but then our subsequent company, ISTA. It's when I learned how to fly, and I ended up flying all over the country, and I was able to visit doctors where they practiced. So, made it easy for me. I traveled to the East Coast, and I spent a week or so flying up and down the East Coast, everywhere. Just whenever the rep said, "Hey, we need you to come in and talk to a bunch of physicians," we were there. And so I've been able to continue that, not only post Aerie or post ISTA, but then brought that whole philosophy to Aerie as well. And so whenever we go to meetings, like the medical meetings, I'll go to OIS when we were holding those, and I would not meet individually with folks. I would not run any company meetings during those times. I was in the booth the whole time. So if anybody wanted to see me, I wouldn't go back to a hotel suite. They had to come to the booth to meet with me. And so that allowed me to see a whole range of folks, not just our KOLs, but anybody showed up at the suite, the reps would bring them over, and we get a chance to visit. And so that's been one of the greatest things for me as being a CEO of an ophthalmology company, is the closeness that any of us can have with the customers. And it was all driven by what Gavin taught us.
Fascinating. I can. I remember the first time I actually met you, which was in the booth, and it's pretty fascinating. And for people who don't know what these big ophthalmology focused meetings are, like the American Academy of Ophthalmology meeting and OIS and ASCRS and all these giant meetings, you wanted to say hi to Vince, you just go to the booth. And that was exactly where we met the first bunch of times. And, it's interesting that you've, at least in my opinion, surrounded yourself with people who buy into your philosophy wholeheartedly. I mean, the people that we've dealt with in the real world as an ophthalmologist from Aerie, some of the close contacts I've had with guys like Evan Hockman and even my local rep, Paul Stelino, and, these people are all genuinely focused on making sure that, we have what we need from Aerie, the company. And it's certainly, I think, a leadership attitude that has filtered down effectively through the ranks. So congratulations, I guess, on that. So
thank you.
What kind of planes do you fly, just out of curiosity?
Well, I stopped flying a couple of years ago, but the last plane that I flew for a little over 10 years was a Citation 5. So it flew, we can carry 8 people. We flew up to 43,000 feet, about 525 miles an hour, somewhere in that ballpark. And we could make it halfway across the country before refueling, and then go land at Teterboro or any other airport on the East Coast we wanted to go to, Boston and things like that. And I could always beat the airlines because, again, it takes so long to go sit at the airport and kind of wait for the plane to take off and this and that, where I would just drive up. I had a co-pilot, and he and I would trade information about the weather and route and all that other kind of stuff. And then I'd do a walk around and jump on the airplane, and we'd be gone.
Fascinating. Yeah, it's a nice way to do it if you can do it.
Yes.
Pop quiz question number 2 for Vince Anido. Who is the only CEO who ever came to Long Island and took the administrative group from our practice out to dinner?
I would guess that was us.
Yeah. I mean, again, I've been in practice, again, as an ophthalmologist, I've been in practice since 1998. And I can tell you that that was the singular time that we were entertained at dinner by the CEO of a pharmaceutical company. And again, I'm part of a Glaucoma Consultants of Long Island, which is a glaucoma subspecialty group, but we are now a member of a private equity backed entity here in New York, OCLI. And, this was just a dinner just to say hi. There was no agenda. We didn't talk about any products. There was no sales pitch. This was you saying, hey, I'd like to come out to dinner and hear how it's going for you guys in New York. It's just it's a very unique, and again, I know we're having this conversation, and I'm sure you've heard this before, but it's a very unique style that I think that sort of endears people to a company or a brand. And I think that attitude is further supported by quality of the products that you provide. If you had good products and horrible management, I think you would find that the attitude towards, the products from that company would diminish. I think people really appreciate management style, especially in ophthalmology, which is a small, tight-knit community compared to some of the other disciplines in medicine. And everybody sort of knows everybody. And it changes, I think a lot of the ways that you really need to do business. And I think one of the things that's come up repeatedly in my conversations now as a part-time venture capitalist is how we perceive Aerie as one of the future important people in our specialty, and a company that we hope continues to grow and support us, because we need some of that tighter knit, more personal approach to how we care for patients because of the uniqueness of the way ophthalmology is practiced. So I think with that as a segue, I'd love to hear a little bit about Aerie from your perspective. I don't think a lot of people who listen to the OIS podcast have any idea where Aerie came from. And it's a fascinating story to me as a glaucoma specialist, especially having known David Epstein in a very cursory way for many years through his research. And obviously as a glaucoma specialist, knew of him very well. But maybe you could walk us through a little bit about the origins of Aerie. I think it's a fascinating story.
Well, it was really interesting. So David always had this whole philosophy about in order to treat a disease, you have to go to treat the underlying cause of that disease. And in glaucoma, as you know, is a disease trabecular meshwork. And so he spent an awful lot of time in his labs and talking to people and trying to drag venture guys in to do nothing but explore molecules that could actually improve the health of the trabecular meshwork. And so he teamed up by luck with a gentleman by the name of Casey Kopczynski, who's our current chief scientific officer and head of our science and technology group. And Casey was a biologist by training, had been at a startup out on the West Coast and moved back in. He was a PhD in biology of all things. And so they hooked up, and Casey's thing was using live animal models for testing, as opposed to what a lot of companies do, in vitro testing. And so the two of them got together, and there was a gift from Procter & Gamble when they disbanded their pharmaceutical R&D unit, and that included a Rho kinase library. So they started testing all of these molecules, and there was none in that library that made sense, and it was mixed up with some other molecules and things like that. But with it came a medicinal chemist. So they added him to the picture, and they started testing things, and Casey came up with all these animal models that they could mimic what would happen if you put a drug on a living organism, one of the animals that they were using for testing. And they came up with one that was very, very predictive for what would happen in humans. And the medicinal chemist actually went off and was, adding his little ornaments to these pharmacophores and, trying to come up with, various things that they could do. And they came out with a very potent molecule. They got tested in the animals first, went into humans, did a great job. And that was the first product that the company had. And it was great until we actually put it into the first of the phase 2 trials. And we found that the drug worked great for a very specific period of time. And that was about the time that I came in. So all of this that I was describing took effect from about 2005 to about 2013 or so. And so when I came into the company, I said to Casey, look, it's great that we have this molecule, but we better have a backup. And so he came out with a backup, and it was, again, dangling the little ornaments off of the exact same molecule that worked so well. And what we found was the second one had the same efficacy as the first one, but actually had no tachyphylaxis. We didn't lose efficacy over time. And that's what came out as Rhopressa. And so we had them both in the clinic, and we were going to choose between them. And it just turned out that the Rhopressa molecule actually made it all the way through. And I think you've probably seen some of our data that goes all the way out to a year with pretty stable IOPs, which is incredible. in the field that we're patients we're trying to treat. And so in parallel, we decided that we were going to take the company public. And unfortunately, the gentleman that we had running the company at the time when I came in as executive chairman just wasn't going to cut it with public investors. We put him out there and talked to a bunch of folks. And because I've had two other public companies prior to Aerie, I knew a lot of the investors already. So I sent them to a bunch that I knew and got feedback in terms of the story and the management team, et cetera. And we decided to make a change. And one of the options that eventually the board ended up taking was me coming back into an operating role, even though I've been retired for a while. And so we did that, brought in the management team. And from the time we did it, which was in July of 2013, by October of that year, we got the company public. And Rocklatane, which is the biggest drug that we have currently out in the market, actually, when we went public, all we had was animal data. And so we moved very quickly from having animal data in 2013 to actually having phase 2s in the 2014, 2015 era. And then everybody kept saying, well, we haven't had a new drug approved for glaucoma forever, a new chemical entity, much less no one's ever approved. And certainly Wiley hates combination products. And we kept saying, yeah, but if what we learned a long time ago is if you do what Wiley suggests that you do, and the drug works, you get an approval. And so we've been listening to them pretty closely, and we have a great head of regulatory and QA that's got something like 40 drugs approved within ophthalmology in the US and a bunch abroad as well. And so he taught us how to listen to Wiley. We did. And long story short, we got both drugs approved within a year of each other. And so we've been very, very proud of that accomplishment. And as you know, the biggest challenge now is how do you repeat it? And so we do spend quite a bit of time on the pipeline, and we've got a growing pipeline that not only includes some future glaucoma meds, but also moves us into dry eye and retina. We bought a company called Envisia that gave us the ability to create these small inserts where we can take small molecules and then mix them with polymers. And we have a deal with a huge polymer company in Europe where we can mix and match these things to create the best environment for that drug, and then make these tiny inserts and inject them in the back of the eye. It's very predictive. And so we're able to move that forward. So it's been it was a long road for those that started in 2005, but we still have in the company, we have about 400 people in the company, but about 10 of them were originals. They're still with us.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, and again, for people who aren't ophthalmologists who might be listening to this, or specifically not even glaucoma specialists, but it's fascinating. It was always fascinating to me as a clinician that even up until the time that Rhopressa came out, we never had a drug that acted directly on the site of damage in glaucoma. We had all these workarounds, reducing aqueous production and increasing uveoscleral alpha and all these other ways to lower pressure. But we know that glaucoma is a disease of trabecular meshwork, and we never, up until Rhopressa, became available, had a drug that acted at the site of actual damage. And I think when I go back to all those lectures that I heard David Epstein, give before his passing, and where he was commenting on how ridiculous it was that we didn't have this, and that his singular mission was to go out and figure out how to find the drug that did that, and how you guys eventually came in and helped commercialize that to help with the realization of his dream. Is just a fascinating story of where a pharmaceutical company comes from. And really when the foundation is looking at an unmet need, or looking at a specific target that is going to work, going out, seeking out the chemical entity that's going to solve that problem, getting it through clinical testing and commercializing it, especially two drugs that do it within 12 months of each other, Rhopressa and Rocklatane within a year, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a fascinating progress. And I think that's one of the reasons why, a lot of us look to Aerie as a company that's going to make these types of introductions for us to new products and new ways of treating disease, because you've already done it once in glaucoma, and we certainly know that you're looking to do it in dry eye and retina and other ways. So I think that's somewhat of a differentiator. And I think, and again, I'm speaking for myself, but again, it's a consolidation of general opinion from colleagues that you guys function in a very lean, efficient, and nimble way, and hopefully we'll continue to see these products getting through clinical trials. I know that you have a phase 2 study going on for your dry eye product right now. Is that correct?
Yes. The product is, we designated as 512. We bought a Spanish company that had developed this product, had a phase 2A study, and we love the technology, we love the target, and obviously everybody loves the dry eye space because there are 30 million patients, but only 2 or 3 million of them get treated, so it's a big deal. But our drug is a agonist to the cold sensing receptor in the eye. So given that where you live today, if you were to walk outside and you get hit with that blast of cold air, the very first thing that happens is your eyes start tearing up.
Thanks for rubbing that in, by the way.
Yeah, you're welcome. And so this agonist family and this particular receptor is one that hasn't been chased before, at least not in ophthalmology. And so, we find that the same mechanism will give us both sign and symptom improvement. So the sign is clearly going to be just tear production. We know that we can do that. We've seen it in the phase 2 trials, in the phase 2A trials. We're moving into this phase 2B trial that's actually powered as a phase 3. So we have enough patients in there and a broad enough protocol that we think that we can get all the data that we need out of this trial to go into, if it works, just have one more trial to do. The same concept, i.e. the same receptor, actually, when we put the drug onto the eye, it cools it down. That's one of the things that the patients continually feedback is, it feels like I just put a little ice on it. It just cools it. It's a cooling effect. And as you know, for the patients, dry eye isn't about signs. It's about symptoms. And so if we can improve the symptoms, we'll get this stick-to-itiveness. They'll stay with that drug as the signs continue to sort of kick in and hopefully improve their condition. And so, we will find out. We were very pleased with the way the phase 2A was conducted and the results that we got. And so we decided not only to run this trial with a sufficient number of patients to make it a 3 if everything worked out, but we backed up the truck from. We ended up putting in all these secondary endpoints. We're using the dry eye chamber. We're using the environment. So what we wanted to do was build a database around the drug with the first trial. And the reason for that was twofold. Number one, if it worked, we had the choice, right? Either I can do just one more phase 3 trial, duplicate this one. But as you know, folks have tried to do that and sometimes it doesn't work. Or you can simply do one of each. You could do one for signs and one for symptoms. So you run 2 more trials instead of just one. So it gives us that flexibility. The things that we learned out of the Rhopressa and Rocklatane, because again, new class into an established area, lots of generics in that category, as we'll have in dry eye with Restasis going generic, et cetera, is that in order to get your product on the formularies in managed care, you better have not only an approval, but you better have a pretty darn good story.
Right.
And so that's what we're trying to build by expanding the protocol to include all these secondary endpoints. And there's all sorts of little twists and turns that we put into the protocol that we think will make for a great story, not only for the patients, but also for eventually getting it onto managed care formularies.
Yeah, absolutely. And when would we expect to hear some of this, the phase 2B / potentially 3 data readout? Do we have any idea when you're planning on completing it?
So again, because there's plenty of patients out there, so enrollment has not been a problem. So we think it'll be Q3 of this year.
Great. Well, obviously looking forward to that. It's interesting, the genesis of that. I wasn't aware how that, compound came to be. You guys grew Rhopressa. I think internally you acquired Invisio and this asset for dry eye. You have a library of several thousand multikinase inhibitors at your disposal. You foresee the future of Aerie being this continuous mix of in-house development, acquisition, external product sourcing. How do you foresee the interaction of all these things as you continue to grow and become a larger piece of the ophthalmology pie?
I think it has to be played out that way. I think if you take a look at the companies that have been successful, and think about Alcon, they hardly ever developed any compounds on their own. They were always, they were big enough they could acquire whoever they wanted to, and so that was their research side. And Jerry Cagle's on my board, so he and I have traded a lot of barbs back and forth since I was an Allergan guy about that. And so, but ophthalmology started simply by borrowing drugs from other therapeutic areas and applying them into ophthalmology, thinking of non-steroidals and the anti-infectives, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And even many of the retina products come out of the cancer field, right? And so here, we're trying to do a little bit of everything. So we're trying to, we've invented our own molecules. I still have medicinal chemists running around. I still have guys that have replaced now Casey in doing the animal models, because what we're trying to do is to figure out how quickly can we get a drug in the hands of the practicing docs to do a small clinical trial. That's really the only time you really know whether you've got something or not, right?
Yeah.
So our whole philosophy is to do that. And so we do see us continuing to try to invent NCEs. We will opportunistically look at acquisition of companies or technologies to bring in. Envisia is a good example. The company that we bought in Spain was another one. And then we now have, because of the Envisia acquisition, a platform with our print technology. So the print technology is basically the ability to make these tiny inserts that then we can inject either in front or back of the eye. And we're focused on the back of the eye on the retina side. We can take molecules, and our proof of concept really was 1105, which is dexamethasone inserted into the back of the eye to treat RVO and diabetic macular edema. And so we were able to show that with our technology and our ability to mix and match polymers, we can take dexamethasone and deliver it for 6 months. The current products either go out 3 years in the case of Iluvien, or they're much shorter than that in the 2 to 3 month range in the case of Ozurdex. But we called out in talking to the retina physicians, which is one of the other reasons I like to travel, is that they said, no, the way that my patients work and things like that, 6 months is the best target. So that's what we did. And what was interesting is, in looking back on the development and our ability, it was our ability to predict based on animal models of retina how well the drug would work and for how long in humans. And that translation from animal models to human models, and be able to predict that with a retinal insert on your first shot out, it was a pretty big deal. So now we can take other small molecules, mix them and match them with whatever polymers we want, put them into our insert and deliver them to the back of the eye. So it makes it a platform technology. At the same time, and this is the fun part for us because it bridges glaucoma and retina, and we're taking a look at 503, which is the most active metabolite of Rhopressa. And we can put that into an insert, go into the eye. We have plenty of animal models that show that we can, in a nerve crush model, we can actually get the axons firing again. What we don't know, we know we can deliver that small molecule to the back of the eye for 6 months or a year. What we don't know is what's the right concentration of 503 to get that effect over a sustained period of time. So again, a lot of flexibility in the print technology. So we're in the clinic now with where we can inject more than one insert just to see what the concentration really needs to be. And then once we figure it out, then we can go back into the formulation side and come out with making sure that we just have one insert or just one injection to deliver, and that'll last for 6 or 12 months. So huge amount of flexibility. So we could do things only on our own, but we continually look at folks that or companies that have things that on our own we couldn't do, and we know how to do clinical studies. We know how to do the regulatory stuff. We know how to get those drugs approved ex-US. So it gives us a great execution platform from which to grow.
I think one of the biggest unmet needs in ophthalmology is drug delivery, taking patients out of the equation to some degree. And having acquired a drug delivery technology, I think is a fascinatingly intelligent decision to try and figure out how we can better deliver drugs. It seems so easy to just put a drop on the eye, and it's so unbelievably challenging to get patients to actually behave and do these things regularly. So that's a great strategy in my opinion. The more fascinating aspect is how Rho kinase inhibitors, I think, are going to continue to play an important role in the health of the eye. I mean, we've already got evidence from Rhopressa that there is a beneficial effect on lowering intraocular pressure. We've seen some of the data outside of the United States that shows the impact of Rho kinase inhibition on corneal endothelium modulation in patients who are using these things. You are looking at obviously it looks like, or it sounds like, neuromodulation, potentially neuroprotective aspects of it. So there's a lot of different things, and Rho kinase, I think, Rho kinase inhibitors are probably at the forefront of their potential in terms of their ability to help ophthalmology patients. You obviously have a plan to provide these drugs outside of the U.S. and certainly with dexamethasone. I think that many people may not know about your relationship with Santen. Maybe you could just spend a minute or two telling us about your plans for how Aerie is going to give access to their products outside the United States.
Sure. So our globalization strategy originated with the fact that we own these molecules. So unlike my last company where we were in licensing products and all we could do was US, here we own all of the rights. And so we could always do it ourselves or partner it off. What we decided to do was that we would take the very first step and take these products either all the way through approval, or at least through a proof of concept, but a full-blown proof of concept phase 2 trial. And so what was interesting is originally we thought that in Japan, we would get all the way to approval with Rhopressa, and then somewhere along the line find a commercial partner, because we realized that as a small company, much less a non-Japanese company trying to launch products in in Japan, that we would have some issues in terms of being accepted by the physicians, et cetera, et cetera. And so we did the first phase 2 trial in Japan, and it was outrageously successful. This is a drug that actually is able to lower pressure even when the patient's starting pressures are pretty low. And so we still saw the 5-6 millimeters of mercury drop, even though the entry pressures were in the 12-13 range. And so that was a fascination to the doctors. And so applying the same concept of getting close to the doctors that we did in the US, we did that in Japan. So we got to know all of the major players. And there's a gentleman, Dr. Aerie, who is the head of glaucoma, as you know, at Tokyo University, which is sort of the godfather there. We've gotten to know his successor and a number of other players. And so they fronted us not only with getting the clinical study done, so their FDA, called the PMDA, he was there with us, and I went along with Casey and our clinical and regulatory teams to present our case, and we were able to get agreement in terms of what to do. And so once we got the phase 2 trial results and they were positive, all of a sudden we started getting calls from major Japanese companies. And so after long negotiations, we selected Santen because they are the largest there. They also have a huge franchise in glaucoma on a worldwide basis, but we were interested in Japan. And so we decided, in order to keep pressure on the negotiations, we continued all the negotiations with the PMDA on the phase 3 program, as if we were going to go do it ourselves. And we actually started the first of the phase 3 trials. And so, because we didn't want our negotiations for a partnership to slow us up. And so that played out pretty well. It did put an awful lot of pressure on the system, and put a lot of pressure on the companies to kind of come together with offers that were interesting to us. And we were able to get to the point of signing a deal with Santen last fall, which brought in about $50 million up front, typical milestones and royalty payments and things like that. And the other thing we were interested in was manufacturing the product, so it will be made for Japan out of our plant in Ireland. And so as soon as we finish that first phase 3 trial, we have a small team of about 5 or 6 people in Japan. As soon as they finish with that first trial, we're going to move them over to looking at the dry eye product as well as the retina products in Japan. So we'll continue a presence there, because all we've done is out-licensed Rhopressa and Rocklatane in Japan. Europe was the same story. We ended up doing not for approval, but a study comparing ourselves to a product called Ganforth, which is a combination product. So we compared Rocklatane to that combination product. The reason we did that, it's the highest price combination product in Europe. So if we do non-inferiority, we get that price with the pricing authorities. So that was the main target there. And we were successful in doing that. And just like in Japan, as soon as we unveiled the clinical result of, call it Mercury 3, all of a sudden people started calling us, both global companies as well as European-centric companies started calling us about taking our product into the European market. Now, originally, we thought we would do that on our own. And as the more we took a look at it, the harder it became, because we could do country by country. We would start in Germany because that's the freest of all the pricing authorities that you have there, and it goes all the way down to the really tough ones. And slowly build our franchise in Europe on the glaucoma side with our own sales and marketing effort. But these companies have started calling us. We're putting enough interesting offers on the table and they could launch both Rhopressa, which is called Rokinza in Europe, and Rocklatane, which is called Rocklanda in Europe. Both of them are now approved. So we said, look, the offers are interesting and they can launch in all markets at the same time. And so we got to thinking about that and started doing the math, and it's relatively straightforward. The prices over there are much lower than they are here in the US. About lead product, again, Ganforth, is about $27 a bottle or something like that. But a leading product in glaucoma sells 5 million units, which is a couple million more than we would sell here, because they just have more volume of product being used over there. And so big product over there between 100 and 150 million US in net sales. We started looking at then the retina products, especially the steroid, and said, well, wait a minute, that product could be, because Europe uses more steroids for retinal diseases than we do here in the US. Over there, that product could sell 300, 350 million. So I'm not a math major, but I'm pretty sure 300 is better than 150. So we said, how about we just partner off glaucoma, and then we'll take not only the dry eye side, but we'll also take the retinal side and keep it for ourselves. And so that's what we're doing. The other benefit is, if I add 5 million units to my manufacturing facility in Athlone, we're running at probably full capacity, and I may have to add a second shift. So all of a sudden, that facility is fully functional. Cost of goods comes down. We own the rights. We control the supply, and that's the best of all worlds for a pharmaceutical company. And so it made all the sense in the world to partner Europe as well as Japan for us.
That's great. I mean, again, I've been around probably longer than I'd like to admit, and having watched the growth of Aerie from infancy through now, it's just fascinating to see the development and how you started, at least in the world as a glaucoma company focused on the US product, and now you're sort of a global entity with glaucoma, dry eye, and retina. And again, I guess the only thing I could say is congratulations on that growth and development. And I think that we will continue to see important products like Rhopressa and Rocklatane that have helped change the way we manage glaucoma patients come out of this company, because we think that the attitude that you have towards finding products that are needed, making sure they get to the patients, and continuing to invest in the development of both processes and products that will benefit patients that we care for has just been exemplary. So I wish we could continue to talk for about the rest of the things and questions that I have, but I think we probably should wrap it up here a little bit. I will say that I did learn some very interesting things about Vince Anido today. So I did not know you were born in Cuba. Technically, it is Dr. Anido.
It is.
Technically, it's Dr. Anido, and I think that I will have to call you that going forward. Not that you expect people to do it. I don't know how you treat that doctor thing, but I only make my patients and my mother call me doctor. Everybody else sort of
most people don't think I look smart enough to have a PhD. So for me, it's
Well,
okay. They don't call
I
me
didn't know that.
doctor.
I didn't know that.
I've
So
never, for formal documents is about the only place you'd ever see my PhD attached to my name.
okay, well, I did not know that. So now it's Dr. Anido. And I did not know that you flew jets. And I also believe, but did not know that you hate snow. And that would explain why you've continuously mocked me while you're in Florida and I'm sitting here in New York. So I appreciate that. But
Yeah, I could have turned the camera around just to show you our 80-degree weather today.
that would make us not friends anymore. So anyway, listen, Vince, I really appreciate you taking the time today to talk with me. I think, I've enjoyed hearing about your growth and development and certainly look forward to continuing to speak with you about Aerie and its progress. And I know we're going to continue to see great things. I hope the listening audience understands the significance of your company to ophthalmologists and to the care of patients. And once again, congratulations on the success and looking forward to seeing, how the future treats Aerie as well. So thanks again for your time today.
Oh, you're welcome, and thank you for the invitation. And we've always been big supporters of your group, and expect to continue to do so in the future. So again, thanks for everybody, and it's been a fun ride.
Yeah, thanks everybody at OIS, and looking forward to future podcasts going forward.
Thanks for listening, and thank you to our guest, Dr. Vince Anido, for sharing his journey of getting Rhopressa and Rocklatane to market in record time. We've learned so much about how Aerie has been able to soar by staying nimble and operating so tenaciously. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and share us with your colleagues to help spread the word. And while you're there, click Get Involved if you'd like to be featured on our podcast. Until next week, keep innovating.